Hi and welcome to Train Signal. We're continuing our Advanced Services course with the lesson on domain and forest functional levels. Microsoft has rolled out by now several versions of Active Directory. Consider the different versions that have come out. Microsoft rolled out Windows 2000 with Active Directory. That was the debut of the Active Directory architecture. That was followed up by Server 2003. There was a Server 2003 R2 that wasn't meaningfully different from 2003. It was just Server 2003 with Service Pack 1. Server 2008, 28R2, and now Server 2012. There have been a variety of different flavors of Windows, bringing with them, most of them, their own flavor of Active Directory. How do we get those various different kinds of domain controllers to all cooperate together inside of the same domain environment? It's an interesting challenge. It's one that deserves your attention. So that's going to be our focus here in this module. We're going to talk about two different kinds of Active Directory configuration settings in this lesson. Specifically, we're going to focus on the idea of domain functional levels and on something called forest functional levels. And the intent of these levels is to accomplish the goal of making sure that we can mix and match different operating system versions of Windows and still be able to get all of our domain controllers to play nicely together. That's a somewhat meaningful challenge because Microsoft continues to roll out new interesting features with each new version of the OS, and we want to be able to take advantage of those in general, but not all of us have a budget that allows us to instantly upgrade all of our servers as soon as a new release comes out. For a variety of reasons, we may hesitate to roll out the latest version of the OS, not the least reason for which is to watch and see how soon the next service pack comes out to make sure that we get all the initial bugs of a new release out of the way before we commit our company to betting our infrastructure on that operating system. With that idea in mind, domain functional levels give us a way to be able to set a baseline standard for all of the various domain controllers in our environment for what set of functionality they're going to be willing to use, so as to avoid confusing down-level domain controllers. Consider the challenge of an organization with 5 different Windows Server 2008 R2 domain controllers and 1 domain controller running Windows Server 2003. Well, there's all sorts of neat new features that came in with Windows Server 2008, but I can't use all or most of them, because if I do, I'm going to baffle that Windows Server 2003 domain controller. It's going to say, hey, what's going on here? I don't recognize this data. Where am I even going to store that information? I don't have a place for that in my directory structure. So being able to roll out new domain controllers poses that interesting challenge. Now here's the good news. In general, I can roll out new domain controllers with an upgraded operating system level fairly easily without doing any violence to the down-level operating systems. In general, that requires the execution of a program called adprep.exe to be able to prepare the domain for that new arrival. But otherwise, no harm in having mixed operating system version domain controllers in the same environment. But the difference comes where I want to be able to turn on features, when I want to enable the capabilities of those new OSs. So within any given domain, I'm able to choose which sets of features are available within the domain controllers for that domain by configuring a domain functional level. And at the forest level, I'm able to specify a forest functional level, describing what sorts of features I can expect to be supported throughout the entire enterprise forest-wide structure. So let's take a look at the test environment, and we'll explore the capabilities of these various different levels. So here I am on server 1. This is my server 2012 domain controller. I'm going to do some configuration of functional levels here. I've got a couple of choices for which tools I use for that purpose. The first logical one you should probably be thinking of when you want to make Active Directory changes in Windows Server 2012 is the Active Directory Administrative Center. This was a tool that was introduced with the Server 2008 R2 OS, in part because of its interesting ability to translate tasks that we used to do and can still do in the Active Directory Users and Computers tool and translate it into PowerShell. Just about everything that you do in the Active Directory Administrative Center GUI is translated into PowerShell, and then the PowerShell gets executed. That's different from the Active Directory Users and Computers tool, which uses native compiled code built into that MMC snap-in. You can see the extent to which PowerShell is a part of our Active Directory Administrative Center GUI by the fact that there is a Windows PowerShell history area here down at the bottom of the Administrative Center GUI. Any task that I perform in the Administrative Center, it's going to show me the PowerShell commandlet being executed to make that happen. That's a little outside of our scope at the moment, but nonetheless, it's worth noting that Just about everything that I can do in Active Directory can be done through the Active Directory Administrative Center. And indeed, there are a number of things that I can only do in this tool that the old Active Directory Users and Computers tool cannot do. It turns out that this tool, unlike Active Directory Users and Computers, does allow me to upgrade domain and forest functional levels from the same tool. The classic Active Directory Users and Computers tool only lets me upgrade the domain functional level. I need the Active Directory Domains and Trusts tool to do the forest functional level. So I can, from here, click Raise the Domain Functional Level and take my choice of which DFL I want to upgrade to, 2008, 2008R2, 2012. Let me illustrate, just for comparison purposes, the other tools at our disposal. I'm going to minimize the Administrative Center, and I'm going to open Active Directory Users and Computers. And you'll note that in the Users and Computers tool, I can go right-click my domain, and I can raise the domain functional level, but interestingly, not the forest functional level. The tool for forest functional level upgrade in classical Windows 2000 through Server 2008R2 environments is this guy, Active Directory Domains and Trusts. With Active Directory Domains and Trusts, I can raise my domain function level by right-clicking the domain, but I can also right-click the Active Directory Domains and Trusts node here and see that I can raise the forest functional level. And once again, I can see the existing one and the options to what I can upgrade to. You'll note that I installed my environment using the Server 2003 forest functional level. An interesting note, when you install a new clean Server 2012 based forest, the domain controller installation process will presume by default that you want a Server 2012 DFL and a Server 2012 FFL, domain functional level and forest functional level. You can set it to something lower, down to a minimum of Windows Server 2003. So the new version of the Server OS, if I install it cleanly, is not able to even conceive of the idea, at least not in the installation process, of a Windows 2000 DC. Now, that doesn't mean that I couldn't add a Server 2012 domain controller to a Windows 2000 based forest that's already existing. That I could do. But what I can't do is retroactively go back and add Windows 2000 DCs to an organization that started with Server 2012 domain controllers. Kind of interesting. Now, Windows 2000 has moved out of support, so technically it shouldn't even be in our networks at all. But that being said, interesting that the software has moved on beyond Windows 2000 from a certain point of view. So the boss comes by your desk and says, hey, I just read about some of the neat new features of Windows Server 2012. Can we put those into effect? I heard things about password settings objects and about Active Directory recycle bins and things. Can we use those things? And I might like to be able to do those sorts of things. But at the moment, my organization is using the Windows Server 2003 domain functional level. So what do I do about that? Well, we need to do an upgrade. Let me jump back over to the Active Directory Administrative Center. And in this tool, I can start to choose a domain functional level and, as we saw, a forest functional level. My choice of level is again going to be dictating what sorts of features I'm going to unlock amongst my domain controllers. If I've got a mix of 2003 and 2008, 2008R2, and 2012 domain controllers, I need to leave my domain function level at Server 2003 until I've either decommissioned all my Server 2003 DCs or I've upgraded them to something else. So the boss says, I want you to prioritize this password settings object feature. I read something about how you can give different collections of users in the same domain different password rules. And we've got a high security group working on really confidential stuff, and I want them to have longer passwords than everybody else in the domain. Make it happen. Well, that's a feature that only exists at the Server 2008 domain functional level. So I can do that. I can upgrade my DFL here. I can upgrade it in the Active Directory Users and Computers tool, and I can upgrade it in PowerShell. We should always consider PowerShell as an option for performing some of these tasks. PowerShell's Active Directory module provides support for a couple of useful commands. Get-AD domain will gather information about the domain in which I'm a part. And we can see that this domain is in the Windows Server 2003 domain mode. Before there were domain function levels, they were called domain modes. Windows 2000 was in the Windows 2000 mixed mode or the Windows 2000 native mode, so that domain mode attribute remains in the recent versions of the tool. If I want to go change that, that's accomplished with the set-ad domain mode commandlet, in which I identify exactly which particular domain I want to make the change to, and which domain mode I want to set. Windows 2008 domain, for example. It says, am I sure I want to do that? In this case, I'm going to say no. I'm going to do it via the GUI. So I'm going to back out of that change, but I could make that change there. In a similar way, we'll talk later about forest functional level changes. I can get information about my forest, get-ad forest, and I can see that it has a forest mode that I can modify with the set-ad forest mode commandlet. So let me jump back to the GUI and prepare to upgrade my domain to the Server 2008 domain functional level. It gives me a warning here that says I may not be able to reverse it. Some domain and forest function levels are reversible. Server 2008 really acts as kind of a floor for domain function level behavior. Once I've upgraded at or above the 2008 DFL, there's no orthodox authorized way to go back down to Server 2003. So once I leave 2003, I'm leaving it for good. If I go to the 2008R2 or the Server 2012 domain function level, there are circumstances in which I can roll back to an earlier DFL. One of the key considerations is whether or not I have turned on the Active Directory Recycle Bin feature. If that's present, that does limit the extent to which I can work my way back down to lower levels. For our purposes here, I'm going to upgrade my DFL to Server 2008 because the boss wants to turn on password settings objects. Let's confirm that I can't do PSOs yet before I do that, just to see that we are in fact making a meaningful change here. I'm going to go to my domain. Inside of my domain, I'm going to go into the system container, because in Server 2012 I can directly access the password settings container that lies inside of that space, within which I should be able to click New over here to create a new password settings object. It won't let me. And the reason why is that we are not at the appropriate DFL to let that happen. So what do? Well, I'm going to go upgrade my domain functional level. Let me also illustrate one other interesting feature enabled by a levels change, and that is the Active Directory Recycle Bin feature, which again you'll note is not available at the moment. The Recycle Bin feature was enabled with Windows Server 2008R2 if you went to the 2008R2 FFL, Forest Functional Level. And that allows the ability to delete a user or an OU and be able to restore it from the Recycle Bin in much the same way that we would have restored a file from the file system Recycle Bin. Same concept. In Server 2008R2, that was enabled solely through PowerShell command line functionality. Server 2012, I can now do that here in the GUI, which is really kind of nice. But I can't do it at the moment because we're not at the right forest function level. So let's change a DFL. I'm going to upgrade my domain function level from Server 2003 to Server 2008. Note that the list that we see here is a list of levels that I can upgrade to. I see a lot of people who mistakenly don't look here in this upper section to note that we're at a current DFL, and we can stay there if we choose to. I'm going to click OK. It's letting me know this is going to be a domain-wide change that I may not be able to reverse. In this case, that's true. I'm going to click OK. Function level has been raised. That information now replicates to all of my domain controllers. They chat with each other about this interesting upgrade, and they now begin unlocking Windows Server 2008 level functionality that wasn't available up until that point, because we would have confused the down-level Windows Server 2003 DCs that might have been in my network. Having okayed that change, let's go verify that we've now made a change that's going to be meaningful to my Active Directory Administrative Center GUI. At the moment, if I try to add a new password settings object to my password settings container, it says no. And the reason why is that this GUI has not taken up that change as of yet. I have a refresh button up here in the upper right-hand corner to be able to go retrieve information about my domain environment. That wasn't enough to do it. Let's close and reopen this GUI and see that it now takes up that change. Now that we've relaunched the Active Directory Administrative Center, we should be able to confirm that if we go browsing back down into the domain, and from the domain into the system container, and from the system container down to the password settings container object, that I can right-click it and create a new password settings object inside that container. PSOs allow me to deploy rules insisting that some particular group or some individual user is subject to a different minimum password length, a different password history, different account lockout rules and such. And I can apply that directly to particular individual users or groups. So that's kind of neat. That's outside of our scope, but I do want you to be aware that I can now do that only because I'm at the Server 2008 DFL. But note that that has not unlocked Server 2008 R2 FFL functionality. If I go right-click my domain and try to enable the Active Directory Recycle Bin, it still won't let me do it. It won't let me do it here at the 2008 DFL. It won't even let me do it at the 2008 R2 DFL. I need to configure an FFL for that. Microsoft has unlocked a number of different features at different operating system levels for both the domain functional and forest functional levels. 2003, where I was just a moment ago, gave us the ability to rename domain controllers. It gave us the ability to redirect the default new users, new computers, objects to dedicated OUs for that purpose instead of the built-in users container, the built-in computers container. On the forest side, it gave us cross-forest trusts. I can knit together multiple forests into a combined enterprise, and that's neat. 2008 gave us PSOs, password settings objects, on the domain side. Nothing special on the forest side. The 2008 FFL doesn't unlock anything in particular, but it does create a floor for new domains being added to that forest. They can only be 2008 DFL or higher domains. Now note that I can take a domain to a higher DFL than the FFL that contains it. I'm at the 2008 DFL at the moment, but if I go look at my forest functional level, we can see that we're still at the Server 2003 FFL. Is that a problem? No. That just means I haven't unlocked the features that are available to a 2008 forest. So let me prepare to unlock the 2008 R2 FFL functionality. We know that my domain is currently at the 2008 DFL. I'm currently at the Server 2003 FFL. And I'm going to do something a little bit dangerous here. I'm going to upgrade my forest function level to Server 2008 R2. Now, by playing by the rules, I shouldn't be able to do that because my domains are all at the 2008 domain function level. I should not really be able to set a forest function level that's higher than my existing domain function levels, because by definition that means I'm turning on forest level features that some of my domains won't understand. What happens if I say OK? It lets me know that I'm preparing to make a forest-wide change. I'm going to click OK. It says it was raised successfully. Now what happened to my domain functional level? Let me go back to my administrative center. I'm going to right-click my domain, go to my domain functional level viewer changer tool, and it has left my domain function level at 2008. That's an interesting potential challenge. This is a don't do this at home sort of a feature. You want to make sure that if you're upgrading to a higher FFL, you want to make sure that you've got your DFLs upgraded as well. So I'm going to take my domain to the 2008 R2 DFL to match my FFL, and that's been accomplished. Because I have, that will now unlock features of the Active Directory Recycle Bin. I can right-click my domain. At the moment, the GUI doesn't know that as of yet. Let me close and reopen the Active Directory Administrative Center. And now if I go right-click my domain, now I can enable the Active Directory Recycle Bin feature. And that walks me through a wizard that will start the process of enabling that nifty ability. So different DFLs, different FFLs are going to turn on a variety of different features. The Server 2012 DFL unlocks a couple of interesting capabilities related to something called claims-based authentication that we'll talk about in some detail in other lessons. Like the 2008 FFL, there's nothing special that happens at the 2012 FFL, but it again creates a floor for all future domains to be added to that environment. They can only be Server 2012 domains in that Server 2012 forest. So I invite you to be very cautious about your management of your domain and forest function levels in your environments. You're going to want to make sure that you don't inadvertently strand some of your down-level domains or down-level domain controllers in an environment that's expecting them to be able to provide a variety of features that they don't know how to handle. The GUI is not clever enough to go look and see if you have a down-level domain that you're leaving behind by upgrading your forest function level, or down-level domain controllers that you're stranding by upgrading your domain to a higher DFL without upgrading those domain controllers first. It's up to you as an administrator to know your organization well and be able to engage an appropriate project plan to upgrade those OSs or decommission them, to upgrade those domains in preparation for that DFL or FFL upgrade. This is one of those great places to rely on PowerShell to help you gather information about Active Directory and confirm that things are configured the way that you expect. This is a great time to rely on your coworkers and ask them to look over your shoulder and double check to make sure that you haven't made any mistakes before you make a potentially irreversible change to those functional levels. So we've reached the end of our discussion of domain and forest functional levels. I hope that that will be helpful for your management of your IT organization. Go rest your brain for a while and come on back for another lesson.